All right, anaerobic conditions. We're going to talk about aerobic cellular respiration, anaerobic cellular respiration, lactic acid, and limiting factor. So I have right here a leg that is helping power up the mountain. This leg, you have the kneecap, some hair in the calf, and the thigh. So let's focus in on the thigh. The thigh has some arteries that's carrying a lot of oxygen to the muscles, or oxygenated blood. So let's label that artery. And inside we have my red blood cells. And inside the red blood cells are my oxygen. Also inside the blood is glucose, the sugar or the food that I ate. All this stuff is going to my muscles. Muscles cells are very long. Inside these muscles, we discussed, are tiny little things called mitochondria. Let's zoom in on the mitochondria. Just as a quick review, the oxygen from the cells, the red blood cells, goes into the mitochondria. Glucose also goes inside the mitochondria. And as a result, you have these other compounds that come out. We have water as a byproduct, carbon dioxide, and then of course the main thing that we want, and I hope you can see it, is ATP. So this ATP is the energy that we want. These conditions where there is oxygen present is aerobic cellular respiration. Now, if the body is running out of oxygen, these cells, these muscle cells, cannot get what they want. They need that energy, but there is no oxygen. So what's going to happen instead, let's look at another cell that isn't getting enough oxygen inside the blood. And let's zoom in on this one further down here. This muscle cell isn't getting enough oxygen. So the mitochondria doesn't work anymore. We cannot use it. Instead, we still have this glucose that's inside, but we don't have any oxygen. Instead, it goes to this fancy a type of enzyme, and we're just going to squiggle lines. That's my enzyme here. And as a result, this reaction occurs, and you have the same products of water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. This is what we want. I have to draw out of the box now. The other thing that it makes is lactic acid. Lactic acid is something that makes you sore. Now, one thing I need to point out is that the number of ATP are very different. The number of ATP from up here in aerobic respiration is somewhere between 36 and 38 ATP. For our sake, I'm just going to say, well, 36 to 38 ATP. This one only gets 2 ATP. This one over here, when there is no oxygen, is called anaerobic. There is no oxygen present here. This lactic acid does build up inside the muscles, and it kind of forms its way in between these muscles. And the lactic acid builds up and that causes sore muscles. Now we got to do some math here. If I'm saying that with our equation that you need, or you get, about 60 million oxygen per hour, you also need about 10 million glucose molecules per hour, because you're trying to make a total of 360 to 380 million ATP molecules per hour. The glucose I'm not eating all the time. Instead, this glucose comes from fat cells, as well as inside my liver, and sometimes snacks when I eat it along the way. So that's how I get that 10 million glucose per hour in order to make all this ATP. However, the biggest limiting factor is oxygen. I cannot get that anywhere else from other than outside. So this is the limiting factor in what allows me to make the number of ATP. Because looking back over here on anaerobic conditions, if I only make 2 ATP compared to 36 to 38 ATP, the biggest difference is that I need 18 times the amount of glucose that I need. So if I'm always in anaerobic cellular respiration, we will need to make a lot of glucose, or at least I'll need to eat a lot of food if I just rely on anaerobic conditions. So it does go back and forth between anaerobic and aerobic, but the biggest thing that limits me is the oxygen. I cannot rely only on anaerobic.